Hello friends and welcome to a basic introduction to lane matchup analysis. These are a series of questions that I ask myself at the start of every game to help me decide, how do I think this lane should go? What do I need to do? What do they need to do? What item should I buy to go along with that? Things like that. It's hard to give you guys a set rule every single time because every matchup is different and there's almost, not actually infinite, but there's so many possible matchups in this game because there are so many heroes, and in your pub games, you get some weird picks for the different roles. So instead of trying to teach you guys very specific matchups, which one day I think we should get into because people have asked, I want to lay out the framework of how you kind of analyze any matchup. So when you get your techies carry and your pudge 5, like, how do you imagine what you should do? That's what these questions are hopefully going to help you guys with. So let's get into it. I'm going to use Ogre Magi as my example. So let's pretend we're playing Ogre as we approach these questions. So first, am I a right-click hero or a spell-based hero? Ogre Magi is a right-click hero. He does a lot of his damage through right-clicks. His spells are not so good. I mean, they're good, but they're not how he plays the lane. How do I know that? I look at his starting stats. So in particular, armor, damage, HP, mana, the regen of those two, and move speed. This one's pretty underrated by a lot of newer players, so I'm going to put some special emphasis on move speed. But how do I use this information to decide that Ogre's good at right clicks? Well, if we look at the stats here, attack damage is pretty moderate. There's nothing in particular, nothing special to write home about. But look at his armor, 7.3, really high starting armor. Now look at his health regen. This is really high. You may not know a lot of the health regens, but most of them are very low to start out the game, between 1 and 2. 5.6 is a lot. This is 5.6 per second, if that's not clear. So what that means is when you get in a right-click trade with Ogre, he takes reduced damage from his armor, and the fact that he's a melee hero gives him some damage block. And he's healing really fast, even without using any regen, so he's really good at right-click trades. He has a decent attack animation as well with his decent damage. What's a weak side? It's a slow move speed, but with spells, he can stun them or slow them, and then that makes it easier to right-click. So my hero is good at right-clicks, and I'm a melee hero. You're going to kind of do that with all the other heroes to decide how you're going to play the lane, but again, we're just using Ogre as an example for now. Power spikes at early levels. Level 1, Ogre, pretty scary. He can start with a stun or ignite. Level 2, kind of good because now you have both stun and ignite. After that, not really. Not that scary. His spells don't scale that well until level 6 when he gets multicast. Then his stun can be a little scary, and the others not so much. The multicast on those is not like that significant. So in terms of the early laning stage, not really a power spike on this guy. He's like a very consistent hero. Maybe level 2, but then like from level 1, he's scary. Level 2, he's a little scarier. And then after that, he's kind of like the same level of scariness as an Ogre. Which means we're going to ask ourselves, first blood attempt, so is Ogre good at this? Yeah, he's pretty good at it. He's got a slow or a stun. So if he brings some buddies along, then yeah, he slows or stuns, and then he adds in right-click damage. That's usually a formula for kills. And since you're good at first blood attempts, you could also go for bounty runes. When those spawn at the start of the game, you're not afraid to go in. If you get poked a little bit, who cares? You got good armor, decent regen. And if they're there to fight you, well, let's fight. We just said we're pretty good at first blood attempts, so if they want to fight, Ogre's not a bad hero for it. Now, if you don't know how to analyze this even more in depth, because we're doing a very basic example with Ogre, I did do some videos with Alexander Kocha on these. We went really in depth into Crystal Maiden, explaining how you look at all these starting stats, all these spells. So if you want more details on that, check out those videos. But I don't want to do the same level of depth in this video because then it's kind of the same thing, but also it ended up being really long. So if you want those, check the description, it's there. But if not, let's keep going. You're going to ask yourself, the small or hard camps, do I or do the enemy need them? Ogre? He could use them for pulls. Every support can use them for pulls. He doesn't really have any other specific need for these camps. What are some heroes that do? Enchantress. She can take over creep and then slap you around the lane. Mirana. She can get ahead by arrowing the big creeps, or really any creeps, and starting to get an advantage that way. Doom, Chen, those kind of heroes, I don't want to get slapped around in the lane, right? Ogre Magi, does he really want to fight neutral creeps? Not really. He doesn't have a spell to kill them that quickly. So, I use it for pulls, but if I were to face an enemy that makes really good use of it, I may want to think about blocking those camps, either with a ward or my body, to make my lane easier. Blocking shenanigans, this is not... Okay, maybe putting them next to each other is a confusing bit. I'm not talking about blocking the neutral camps. I'm talking about blocking the lane creeps. So everyone can do some body blocking, but some heroes can do some really unique things, like Earthshaker can fissure block the wave and really change starting lane equilibrium. A hero like Enigma can kill off one of his creeps, maybe even two, and not only change equilibrium, but also ruin experience. So if you're aware of that, is there anything you need to do? Ogre Magi, not a hero who can fissure block the same way Earthshaker can. But if you know the Earthshaker is going to fissure block, you can body block as soon as the creep spawn and start to mitigate the effects that way. If you know Enigma's going to kill the creeps at his fountain, or sorry, his tier 3 tower, you can go stand near there if you're willing to. Ogre happens to be a hero who's pretty tanky, a bit robust. He could probably risk going there, depending on who the heroes in the game are, but a little slow, so he does want to be careful of that. But the first wave can really impact how the game's played out. So you want to ask yourself, like, is anyone doing anything kind of silly here? Like, I want to be ready. The mid lane runes, so it doesn't really matter to us, but some mid laners really need not certain runes, but like any runes to refill their bottles. Someone like Storm Spirit plays around his bottle a lot. If you know your teammate or the enemy is heavily reliant on runes, you may want to see if you have time to go over and help to secure the runes for your team, because that could help you out a lot, or at least help your mid lane out a lot, which he's part of your team, so it's going to help you out. And if you have some people who aren't, like Sniper, Dragon Knight, those don't, like, of course, everyone gets some benefit from the runes, but they don't need the runes as much. And so maybe if we have something else to do, we're not going to go help them. But if you can spare the time, it's always nice to. But this question is to help us assign a priority to that, to whether we head over to the rune. Finally, you're going to ask yourself, does anyone clear stacks on my team? Because that's something as a support we can do. As we're moving around, we can stack creeps. And do we want to? Does anyone on my team clear stacks? If they don't, like, I'm not going to do it. Why am I going to waste my time? I don't need to do that. So ask yourself, does anyone clear stacks? Does the enemy clear stacks? Also a good question to ask, because maybe you can steal them. If you know the enemy has a Sven, they're probably going to stack a lot for that guy. If you steal the stack, I mean, maybe not as Ogre, but if you can get your team to steal it, pretty good. So these are the questions I ask myself. Some very general questions, at least, when the game starts, to help me decide what I'm going to do, what items I'm going to buy, how I'm going to approach the lane. Now, all the specifics of that's harder to explain. This might be a little more general than some of you guys want, but it's hard to do because every hero is a little specific. The last thing we're going to think about in this video is the different configurations of the side lanes and essentially the actual matchups there, not just general questions. But keep these three general questions in mind as we go into it. Who is getting the last hits? Is there kill potential? And the game's called Defense of the Ancients. Can we defend towers? Because sometimes you're losing in these other regards, but if you can defend your tower, that can be considered... Well, maybe you don't consider it a win, but you consider it good enough. That's like loss mitigation sort of stuff. But let's take a look at these matchups. There's a lot of them here. So first, think about the one-on-ones. The carry versus the offlane. Carry versus the 4 support. And then the 5 support versus those 2 guys. If it's just one hero versus one hero, what happens? Like, who can get the last hits? Can one of them just kill the other? And can one of them take a tower or defend a tower? The most common one-on-ones are the cores, because they're in the lanes going for last hits and potentially threatening each other. And then the supports are like goofing off in the jungle or something, attempting pulls, contesting each other, that sort of thing. So those are the most common 1v1s, but sometimes people die, sometimes weird stuff happens, who knows? And that's when you may also want to know these like 5 support to the off lane, carry to the 4 support, things like that. Now, I usually start with the 1v1s in my mind because it's the easiest. It's the most straight up comparison. As you get into these other ones, it gets a lot more complicated as we start adding multiple heroes into the mix. And it's very hard to say for every single matchup, this is exactly how it should go. That's the crazy thing about Dota. There's so many different ways it could go with all the different heroes. So these are you just have to have a general feeling for how it should go, because unless you personally experience every lane multiple times, because some things could be a fluke, sometimes someone messes up, things like that, it's very hard to have a specific rule for every single matchup. So I move into the 2v2. That's the most common right now. If it's a tri-lane meta, just like do this with the other configurations of 3v1, 3v3, things like that. But right now it's 2v2. It's the toughest. That's when you have all 4 heroes there. So maybe hold on to this. Let's look at some other ones real quick. 2v1s. These are usually more obvious because generally speaking, 2 heroes beat 1 hero, but actually not always. And those are the ones you really want to look out for. And then maybe after you think about those 2v1s, maybe that makes it easier to think about the 2v2, but also sometimes not. So let's actually just move into an example, and that might clear it up a little. So let's take a look at a Spectre Undying lane versus a Legion Commander Earth Shaker lane. Again, keep these 3 questions in mind. So here, if you want to pause right here and try to decide who wins or loses each of these matchups, I think it's a good exercise, because I cannot, we're doing an example here. I can't tell you for every single one of your games. Like, God, how am I supposed to predict? You have a Pugna safe laner and a like Queen of Pain 4, like all these weird heroes in your pub games, This is something you've just got to do every single game, and you just have to take your best guess at it. So here's some practice. Pause here, give it a shot, unpause when you're ready. I'm about to get into it, so I hope you paused and you're ready to go. Let's start with Spectre and the 1v1s. Spectre versus LC, that's a losing matchup. We're thinking from the safe lane perspective right now. So I guess red is a Dire win, let's say. It's Dire off lane, Radiant safe lane. Legion Commander, typically a very strong off laner. Very good against melee heroes. Spectre, often considered a fairly weak laner, though she's actually a little stronger than people give her credit for, but still kind of on the weak side, actually, I think. So I would say in a 1v1, Spectre loses to Legion Commander. Legion would be able to deny a lot of things from the Spectre and bully her out. Probably can't kill her right away, but is likely to whittle down the Spectre to the point where there is then kill potential, and at that point, Spectre has to play so carefully, she starts losing last hits. Tower, Legion probably not going to take the tower, and as long as Spectre doesn't die, she can be there to defend the tower, so this one, not a huge consideration for this 1v1. Then, Spectre versus Earthshaker. If Earthshaker were a core, I would actually push it towards Earthshaker's side, but support Earthshaker has a different build, does different things, and I would say he doesn't do that much to Spectre, because Spectre can just use her Spectral Dagger to get over the fissure block, and that's kind of a big thing that Earthshaker does in the game. Let's look at Undying. He wins both of these 1v1s. He slaps them. Undying is meant to destroy melee strength heroes. So LC, slap. Earthshaker, slap. He actually slaps him so hard, I think he wins in the 1v2. So let's jump down here. He can't just stand there and right-click them, but almost, like, so close. Usually he has to do some decays, kite around a little bit off the cooldown, things like that. But pretty much Undying versus just 2 strength melee heroes, like, that's a big slap. And this makes the matchup analysis for this example a lot easier. Anything with Undying is going to be a win. So in the 2v2, the 2v1, 2v1, Undying is there, slap. Easy wins. What happens when he's not there? Well, it's going to be a loss. She loses to Legion 1v1, so when Earthshaker's there to add in extra shenanigans, she's not going to have a happy time. So how do we take this color-coded matchup stuff and imagine how we play the lane? So let's think about it. If you're the Radiant, you're fairly happy with a normal lane, because a normal lane is usually like 2v2. Maybe like 2v1 when he's like going to roam or something. Like, you're generally happy with typical laning, because Undying will bully them out. Probably can't kill them. He's not usually the guy who gets kills just on his own, and maybe level 2 he can. A lot of people underestimate Soul Rip. But typically, if people play it safe, they won't die, but they'll be zoned out. And that means your Spectre gets a lot of last hits, and therefore your tower's fine. If you're the Undying, then, you want to be very aware of situations of why you would leave the lane. Because we just said, as long as you're in the lane, it's a win. What are some things we talked about earlier? Bounty runes. Probably worth getting, but Spectre's got to know. I better be careful. Undying's not here. I could die. I could maybe not die, but I'm going to lose the lane for a little bit. And if you're Undying, you want to be fast about it. You want to, like, I'm not going to dilly-dally too long because Spectre's losing the lane when I'm not there, and we're winning when I am. So I want to get back as fast as I can. You probably don't want to do pulls that much unless you have to. If Equilibrium is absolutely destroyed, maybe you have to do some pulls. But otherwise, it's actually not that good for you because when you go to pull, you're out of the lane. And you go from winning the lane to losing the lane. Pulling tends to do that because when you go to pull, it is a 2v1 for a little bit, but generally it's okay. But as Undying, that's kind of bad because you kind of just want to like slap them around a lot. So if you're Undying, you want to keep that in mind. Now, if you're the Dyer, the offlane, you want to identify the 2 situations where you could possibly win. 2v1, Undying is gone. How can you get Undying to leave? If he messes up, sure, you can take that as an opportunity. If you manage to kill him, use that opportunity too. But in the beginning of the game, kind of hard to get Undying not to be there. So let's look at this other one. Can we get some one-on-ones? Because even though we'll lose Earthshaker to Undying, Spectre to LC, that's good for us. So this is when you would see Earthshaker do something like pull the creeps from behind the tower, pull them all the way around, and force Undying to chase him. And then it becomes a one-on-one. And Undying is faced with this decision. If he knows, we lose the one-on-one. I don't want that. But if Earthshaker's just allowed to be alone with the creeps, that's also really bad because they're denying a whole wave to us. So now you're choosing. And it's tough for Undying because you have to figure out what to do. I generally recommend going to chase it. But that's how we start to take this and turn it into imagining how we're going to play the lane. Let's do another example real quick. This one will be faster. Disruptor. We're only going to change Disruptor or Undying for Disruptor. Disruptor, his Thunderstrike, he's usually considered a good lane bully because of the Thunderstrike, but it can be dispelled by Legion commanders press the attack. So take a look at this. Again, pause here if you'd like to try it yourself, but I'm about to get into it, so that's your this is your last warning. 1v1s, Spectre, again, same deal. Loses and kind of ties. Disruptor beats Earthshaker, but I would say loses to Legion Commander so long as she has pressed the attack. If she does not have pressed the attack, though, I would say Disruptor wins. So this is where just game knowledge comes into play, knowing how to adapt to your enemies. Legion Commander should start with her W, level 1, and then she doesn't care at all what Disruptor does. If Disruptor, or if she does not start with press the attack, then I think Disruptor has to capitalize on that level 1 before she has press the attack and bully her out. But that's kind of like going further. But this, I don't know. This is why it's like, technically, it's never this clear cut, right? Where I am kind of like saying you win or you lose. But like, there's always like levels of play and stuff around that. If you can identify opportunities to where you're like stronger, you need to capitalize on that for the other opportunities where you're weaker and you can't do anything. Moving on, Spectre still loses 1v2. Disruptor also, I would say, loses 1v2 because, you know, even if she was a hero where she can't dispel, 2v1, generally not good. Undying's kind of unique like that. But he is a ranged hero versus 2 melee, so he will get in some free auto attacks and stuff like that, so long as he keeps his distance. Now we look over here, 2v1. This is another easy one to identify. We said Disruptor is good against Earthshaker, so if he's by himself, 2 heroes to 1 hero, like, yeah, easy win. This is where it gets kind of complicated. Now we said we're kind of good against Earthshaker, but then kind of bad against LC. But generally, I'm a good laner. But, you know, I also have this weak laner. And it's like, this is where it gets tough. This is where it gets really tough. I would say This is dire side favored towards the LC Earthshaker just because of how good LC is. But this is where people could mess up if the levels get uneven. Someone pulls an advantage. This is where how you play could really affect this game. And in the 2v1, it becomes even more unclear, where LC actually kind of, she should be okay in the 2v1, I feel like, as long as she has pressed the attack. And then she might need some extra regen, but I think she'd be fine. So if we imagine now, if you're a Disruptor, how do you play this lane? Well, 2v2 probably has to happen at least a little bit, and we're just going to have to play smart. Get in our harass, things like that. But maybe we need to do some pulls, because frankly, we're not doing that great in the 2v2. And even though we lose the 2v1, if you can pull an advantage from pulling, like I just said, if he gets level 3 before they do, and suddenly has a really powerful Thunderstrike, she actually kind of dispels it. If she doesn't dispel it, I don't know. But like when if Spectre gets higher level than these guys, then she has an easier time last hitting. She's more robust in the lane, things like that. Then you start to shift it in your favor a bit. So maybe I don't want to just play the typical 2v2 lane as Disruptor, unless she doesn't have press the attack. Then maybe I do. Or if you ever identify that the Earthshaker, is roaming, then that is a great time to capitalize. Because whereas we thought, like, this might be a little scary when it's 2-on-2, 2-on-1, like, this is something we can do. We need to work on this. So in this case, Undying was a little more clear-cut about what you should do. Disruptor, it's more like, when I see the Earthshaker is gone, I gotta do something about it. If I see the LC mess up, I gotta do something about it. And I have to try to find the matchups that are ideal for me. So if we can somehow bully out the LC, that's great. And, maybe he can even then roam a little bit, because Spectre will be fine against the Earthshaker, things like that. If she wasn't fine against whoever she's left against. So for example, here, let's say Earthshaker's roaming. Should Disruptor leave Spectre to a 1v1? Maybe. He has to realize that she'll be losing for a little bit, but if the lane's in a good spot, maybe that's mitigated. If something else he's doing is worth it, maybe it's okay to lose for a little bit, like you do a pull. So you're losing the lane, but then you get an advantage through the pulling. Or maybe he's going for the bounty runes, and it's like, look, you can miss a couple last hits so I can get the bounty runes for the team. Things like that. You have to weigh your decisions a little bit more. And that's kind of it. So to bring it back to those earlier questions, this is where I think it all stems from. Asking myself these questions at the beginning of the game and trying to figure it out. How do I deal all my damage through right clicks? All right, I got to look for opportunities to right click. The enemy is a melee right clicker. Well, I got to keep my distance. And if he's not making use of his right clicks, he's like not doing anything in the lane. All these questions come into play about how I'm going to then think about those matchups. Oh, I lose this matchup 2v2. I want to avoid that. Oh, they win if they have the hard camp. I want to block that camp. Oh, they're going to block the lane. I want to do something. I want to be ready to pull, things like that. All these questions. There's probably even more. These are just the ones that came to mind after I sat down and thought about it. But give it a shot. Ask yourself these questions. If you don't have time at the start of the game, ask it later at the end. Go through this list and see if you made a mistake. Oh, you know what? They had a Tusk. I'm a weak support. Maybe going for the bounty rune was a bad idea because I ended up feeding first blood. I should have been able to identify that. Or the Enchantress destroys you in the laning stage and you realize, you know what? I had no way to deal with creeps. I should have recognized that. I should have blocked her camp or something like that. So give this a shot. Let me know what you think. This is what I do, and I hope it helps you guys too. Thanks. See you in the next video. Bye.